Hey. Okay. So someone gave me an excuse to talk about Elijah Moore. And by excuse, I mean they mentioned his name. So that's this video. I'm going to break down first look style, really, Elijah Moore's production in college and how he is really interesting. He's good. He's great. You should draft him. Anyway, let's skip over to the other screen and try and get under the 30-minute mark for a change on one of these videos and take a look at Elijah Moore's production, how it compares to past wide receivers who've done well in the NFL, which is my guiding principle on which ones look like they might be good in the NFL, and where he's currently ranked in DLF's ADP to prove that he's not in fact overrated. So according to DLS current ADP, rookie ADP, which means nothing because we don't have draft capital and people are taking Terrence Marshall, over Elijah Moore, that's probably going to look silly in future years, but that's how I feel, and so that's what I'm saying. Elijah Moore is currently ranked as the 15th overall player, according to ADP. He is a top 12 wide receiver. You skip over just to wide receiver ranks, but he's valued mid-second round right now, and he's tiny, so it might just stay there. He's around 5'9", very fast, according to Pro Day times, but we're also ignoring all of that, so we're more interested in how he compares to past prospects in the thing most past prospects who are good in the NFL actually have in common, which is surprising to some people, not height and BMI, it's how productive they were in college. Shock horror, there we go. So skipping over to the database, if you're interested in it or want to prove how I'm wrong, then the database, as always, is the database. I can't even say the word. The database is linked in the notes. The notes. Yeah, it's called Notes on YouTube. To this video, and it's free. Just follow through, and you can go own a nerd using his own nerdiness. But Elijah Moore ranks at third in this class, according to my pre-draft model, which again should be taken with a grain of salt because draft capital is also important to gaining opportunity in the NFL. And also, we backpedal and piggyback on a bunch of NFL signal since they've got multi-million-dollar companies grinding stats and looking at film, and I'm just this guy in a basement looking at a spreadsheet. So, you know, we like to piggyback on the signal from the NFL as well. But pre-draft, it's very clear, according to his production compared to past prospects, from the way I look at it, my little nerdy model looks at it, that he was extremely productive and compares positively, extremely positively, compared to past prospects. Now, he is tiny, so let me get to that in a little bit. I'm really not concerned about it. But if we look at his market share of receiving yards compared to the average of past prospects, you see his age 19 and 20 seasons were far above the average. Now, being exceptionally above the average is exceptional, but it doesn't mean your upside in the NFL is quantifiably better than someone who is marginally above it. All we're looking for here is signals that compared to past prospects, since this is the thing they share most in common, that he was producing well at the ages he played, not that being exceptionally productive. That can all be team context or, you know, small sample variants of that individual season. But across the thing that most NFL prospects who turn out to be good for fantasy have, Elijah Moore was good. Now, again, essentially what I'm saying here is the distance between his age 19 and 20 market share receiving yards and that trend line, the average of top 24 players, doesn't mean he's due top 12 seasons. It just means he compares more positively to those who've actually broken out. Now that's important because with Elijah Moore and tiny guys, we end up talking about slot rates and can people score lots of fantasy points from the slot. Yes, they can. I'm utterly convinced of that, but more importantly, his role where it might be more slot-based, and that comes through off his other evaluations, yards per reception, and where he's playing most in college, not in the NFL, that he might primarily be used in the slot role. But he does have an outside skill set, which shows up markedly when you look at his yards per team pass attempt, which is the other stat I like to look at as age adjustment. Now, this exceptionally high year is happening a lot for the 2021 class because a lot of those seasons were shrunk, and therefore you're seeing a high level of efficiencies and smaller sample sizes. Elijah Moore himself only played 8 games that last season. But the reason that I'm still excited about that age 20 season is he scored over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns in 8 games. That's not just small sample, he was having a megalithic style career in 2020, and he is the wide receiver 8 and a second round pick right now because reasons, I guess. That's as good as I got. But even we go to age 19 where he was playing a full season, a regular college year, he was above average both in terms of the percentage of the role he earned out in terms of market share receiving yards and how efficient and how voluminous that role was, that unique blend of volume and efficiency that yards per team pass attempt was. He's still well above the average for players who do well in the NFL. In yards per team pass attempt. So yeah, and that's pretty much the way his profile looks across the board, across any of the stats. Now, as for concerns, I would say, for a tiny guy, he has an unusual concern where a large percentage of his production, like if you look at dominator rating, you see he has a 45% dominator rating at age 19, which is well past significantly above average at any age, frankly. If players play to age 25, maybe the curve would get up that high, but they don't. Unfortunately, 54% of that dominator rating, I need to skip over further. Nope, that's yards. Sorry. Where is it? There. 54% of that dominating rating comes from touchdowns. And as I've mentioned before, while I can't ultimately prove it, I found a lot of prospects that end up having good production and then fail in the NFL tend to have been over-reliant on touchdowns for their dominator rating. So that's concerning to me slightly. But again, as I just looked at on the graph that you saw, hopefully if you were listening about 4 seconds ago, his market share of receiving yards is still above the average for most players playing at age 19. So while he was exceptionally productive in touchdowns and his 45% dominator rating is too reliant on that, even if we reduce the touchdown down to something more reasonable at age 19, he would still have an above average dominator rating, still have an above average market share receiving yards, still compare well to past prospects. So I'm not as concerned with that touchdown imbalance, although it is something worth noting. Especially, as I keep mentioning, where he's 5'9", people are going to be worried he's just a slot wide receiver and can't get significant touches in the NFL. Now, his touchdown dependence is actually a positive indicator in that role, in that he was getting usage inside the red zone. He wasn't getting usage as a red zone threat and making deep plays for long distance touchdowns, which again creates fantasy upside if he maintains his role, even though it is a lower, presumably A-dot role, currently in college into the NFL. He's still getting enough usage in the red zone and as a playmaking touchdown receiver, making plays outside the red zone for touchdowns, that he could be very fantasy relevant. To that point, if we look at his yards per reception, which I started to talk about more because I realized people are using it as a synonym for A-dot due to a live stream I did recently, it's not A-dot. Yards per reception is a very poor replacement for A-dot. Unfortunately, yeah, I get it's the best we've got without going behind very high paywalls, but I'll point out that Rondale Moore's yards per reception is a lot higher than Elijah Moore's yards per reception is a lot higher than Rondale Moore. In fact, this 12.9 yards per reception puts him in the range of Calvin Ridley, who had a similar yards per reception, and Tyler Boyd, who plays much more of a slot role than specifically Calvin Ridley does, and we've seen both of those players pay off in terms of fantasy. So while there are more concerns about Rondale Moore's role in the NFL, and again, I've got to do a video on him, I don't think I've done him yet, I think the fact that Rondale Moore's profile was limited to just one season means that we could have seen that role expand if he played more than 4 games any of his other seasons. Elijah Moore did that, and we saw his yards per reception expand to the heights of Calvin Ridley and Elijah Moore, and in fact a few other players that have finished in the top 12. So his overall dependence on slot production compares okay, in fact pretty decently, to other smaller players who've had a great deal of fantasy success. And the other two things those players share in common, again, is the overall volume they were able to achieve for themselves, adjusted for the ages that they were playing, and their yards per team pass attempt adjusted for the ages that they were playing compared to past prospects. So Elijah Moore fits in that category. Now, that's not a direct comparison. I'm not saying Elijah Moore is Calvin Ridley or is Tyler Boyd. It's just a few of the very good names for fantasy that Elijah Moore's overall stat profile compares well. That doesn't mean he plays like them, or he's going to have similar moves or similar routes or similar off-the-line moves in order to create separation. That stuff really has to come from tape evaluation, in my opinion. I listen to Zach Reed. I still listen to Jake Anderson, former co-host of the Dynasty Crossroads, to get a better idea of how players actually play on the field. So the fact his statistical profile compares to those specific players as a smaller player who had great age-adjusted production doesn't mean he plays like them. It just means he was productive in a similar way to those players in college. And again, that's comparing them across the stats that have the most signal for players actually turning out to be good in the NFL. The other thing I'll point out, and why I don't think he's overrated, because while Rondale Moore comes from a conference that has the NFL has very rarely spent draft capital on, Elijah Moore comes from the SEC West. That is the most highly drafted side of the most highly drafted conference in college football. The NFL loves the SEC West. It's one of the reasons that we like Jamar Chase, because he's coming from Louisiana State, from the SEC West. Elijah Moore is coming from Mississippi, perhaps a slightly lower drafted team than Louisiana State or Alabama, because everyone wants to draft Alabama players, despite, 3 wide receivers being decent ever in the NFL for fantasy purposes, at least, from that team. Mississippi has a fairly decent history of producing hits, and more importantly, the SEC West category simply means that the NFL is aware of them, that you can make very few excuses about going up against bad competition. As far as competition goes, as far as I'm aware, the SEC West is competing against teams that everyone kind of considers legitimate, at least. There's no, this guy's playing against bank managers and future car salesmen. This guy was playing in a significant conference the NFL's aware of, and already has rumors of perhaps being a day 2 or second round pick. And he's currently right now a second round rookie value. Not that we can draft him or trade for him right now, unless you're in some crazy league that does that. I would advise against it, but he's definitely someone I have my eyes on for my rookie drafts when they come along. He's someone I want to know the draft capital of, but because of where he's coming from, I think there's a fairly high expectation that he's going to get top 3 round draft capital with an above average production profile across the metrics that have the most comparison to past players. I don't care that he's 5'9". I can't tell you how little I care that he's only 5'9", because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He compares well to smaller players that have gone on to do well as well, and we know that players with this types of yard per reception, this type of production in college, can develop a role that is incredibly fantasy relevant when they go to the NFL. So we still have to see the draft, we still have to see where he goes, but I don't care. I think Elijah Moore was incredibly productive in college. I think he's coming from a place that should fill us with expectations of draft capital, like Sugar Plum Fairies. I don't know why I just referenced a Christmas rhyme, but I did. And tell you what. Let's look at other past prospects from Mississippi. AJ Brown and DK Metcalf. Draft Elijah Moore. There's a little more to that story, because the 1 year that Elijah Moore played on the same team as DK Metcalf and AJ Brown, he was like the wide receiver 5 overall. That was his age 18 season, which, unlike my age 18 breakout ages, or if you paid attention to any of my other content you have, but that was his first season, and Jamar Chase had a below average season his first year at age 18. Not every player does it. That's why we judge by age, not just look for breakout age. Since DK Metcalf and AJ Brown went to the NFL, Elijah Moore has taken over that position in Mississippi. Not last year, age 19, being the wide receiver 1 above Braylon Elwood and Jonathan Mingo. He had 15.7 points per game last year with 1,000 yards, over 1,000 yards, and 8 touchdowns in only 8 games. No wonder his stats look good in that shortened season. He was scoring 32.5 fantasy points a game in PPR scoring. draft Elijah Moore if he's in the second round. Like, I'm not against it. I'm for it. Yeah, he just looks good, man. Again, slightly concerned about that touchdown inequity between his touchdowns and yards, but his yards alone a significant share of the team's offense, enough to be positive. He doesn't need that dominator boost with the touchdowns in order to make him look good. I'm a fan. I know AJ Brown has actually kind of Twitter pushed his own team to draft him because he wants to play with him again. Presumably that means like he's a great guy. I don't know. I have no narratives for you, just facts. And the facts are he compares well to good players. He's coming from a conference the NFL loves. We should expect draft capital for him. And he's good. He's very good. I like Elijah Moore. Is that clear at this point? Like, yeah. That's it. I mean, there's no negative outside his age 18 season, which is easily dismissible when you're playing behind DK Metcalf and AJ Brown, and it's your first season and you're 18 years old. If you like Jamar Chase, you should like Elijah Moore. You should like Elijah Moore a lot. Not as much as Jamar Chase, but you should definitely like Elijah Moore a lot, especially as wide receiver 8, as mid-second round pick right now according to DLF ADP. So, yeah, I'm just going to stop it now. Look, we're under 20 minutes, not even under 30 minutes. That's my Elijah Moore. Thank you for the excuse, dear Patreon, just by mentioning his name on a comment to one of my other videos. I've kind of been dying to talk about Elijah Moore, if that's not clear. Appreciate it. Thanks very much. Thanks for checking out this video if you did. If you didn't, I'll thank you when you finally do check out a video, I guess. Like and subscribe. I think those are the things I say. Appreciate it. Bye. Bye. See you next time.